TCU should go get Dominic Richardson out of the transfer portal and place him in the running back room.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 seasons. Transfer portal news. A new name has entered. So we're done with the first portal window, but there are still announcements that are trickling out and players that are making a decision with where they want to go. And one name that caught my eye today, because he's a Big 12 player, and he actually, I forgot about this when I first saw his name, but then as I was preparing for the show, I was like, oh, wait, he was connected to TCU. He was committed to TCU at one point as part of the 2020 signing class. He just didn't end up on campus because TCU ended up signing Zach Evans in a huge surprising twist. But Dominic Richardson, who started his career at Oklahoma State, transferred to Baylor, and this past season at Baylor, he went into the season as the starting running back and a guy who was part of that rotation along with Dawson Pendergrass. And then Bryson Washington emerged as a legit star, and he took over that role and started running all over everybody. And then Pendergrass was sort of their change of pace guy. And so in the middle of the season, Richardson kind of looked up at the depth chart and said, hey, I got another year of eligibility. I'm going to move on, preserve my red shirt, and use that eligibility elsewhere. And so Max Olson today reports on Twitter that Richardson has entered the transfer portal as a grad transfer. He produced 2,224 yards for scrimmage and 17 touchdowns during his time at Baylor and Oklahoma State. He redshirted this season and left the program in November. His best season was in 2022, where he ran for 543 yards on about 4 yards per carry at Oklahoma State. Followed that up with 519 yards on 4 yards per carry in 2023. Had 8 touchdowns in 2022 in that season that he had a career high in yardage as well. But has never really been a dude that has been able to kind of solidify himself as the lead dog. And so you might say to yourself, Steven, that's not me talking in the third person. That's me impersonating you, the listener. Why would you go after someone like this who is been kind of a journeyman back? And to be fair, he sort of fits the mold of players that TCU has taken in the past. Dominic Johnson from this past season, Trey Sanders the year before, even though he has slightly better production than those guys. Actually, much better production than Trey Sanders. And Johnson had like 1 year where he had over 500 yards. Richardson has had a couple. But he's got an injury history, sort of fits the bill of the type of players that TCU has gone after in the running back room that we've sort of complained about and just aired our grievances about over the past few years. Here's my perspective on it. I'm at the point where we're on like day 500 or whatever of me yelling and saying, hey, you got to have a run game. You need to invest. And I've been more of the opinion of you need to invest in the offensive line, because I think if you have a competent offensive line that can block well in the run game, then your running backs will thrive regardless of, talent level where they're at. My perspective has changed a little bit given the way that Cam Cook struggled. Even though I didn't feel like this O-line was great in the run game, you saw what Savion Williams did. And I think at times you saw the burst that like Jeremy Payne had and Nate Palmer in the bowl game. And it's like, man, if you had that type of juice at the running back position all year, I'm not saying it would have been consistent, but it would have been better. I'm at the point with this coaching staff where I'm just kind of convinced they're not going to do what I want them to do. What I want them to do is to go get a lead back, like a veteran presence who has been a number one running back other places. And I know like that in general in football is not in vogue anymore. Whether it's the NFL, whether it's college, you don't see guys that are toting the rock 30 times a game. I get that. But there has to be a balance between that and what I feel like TCU has done this past season, which is just kind of, hey, we hope on a wing and a prayer that we've got 4 or 5 different guys that can run the ball 6 or 7 times and have some success. So if that's the way you're going to approach it, then to me, this is a guy who would totally make sense to have in the room, because you got Kavorian Barnes, who has sort of a similar story at UTSA, even though he was like their dude for 2 years, falls out of favor. Some young players step up. So TCU's taking a flyer on him and saying, hey, if there's anything left here, we'd love to see it happen in Fort Worth. And I know that if I asked Sonny Dykes, if I was like, hey, what's your plan with the running backs? He would tell me, well, we've got good young players. We've got Jeremy Payne. We've got Nate Palmer. John Denman is a guy we really like who's coming in as a true freshman. We've got 3 or 4 guys that can make this thing work. But in my mind, if you're going to approach this, and I'm okay with that. I've said before, I'm like, I know it's a tough balance. You're trying to, it's this push and pull of like, when do you go after veteran players in the transfer portal and when do you trust your young players? But if you're going to take that approach, why would you not add one more player to this mix and just simply say, hey, it's an open competition? Anybody can make it happen here. It's up to you. Who can show off in practice? Who can show off when we get them the ball in games and make things happen? And you might say to yourself, well, how do you sell that to Richardson? Dominic Richardson's going on year 6. He wants to go somewhere where he's going to play. Well, just to be honest about it, I think you sell him on the fact of like, we're giving you a chance. Maybe I'm wrong about his interest level, but I don't think there's just going to be people left and right knocking down the door. I feel like he'll have opportunities, but you frame it as, hey, there's no set starter here. So if your goal is to have one more season where you're a featured back, that opportunity awaits you if you can show that you can do it. And you line them up and you give everybody, as many carries as you can during the spring and the fall, and you see who emerges. And if that ends up being Jeremy Payne, fantastic. I liked what I saw out of Jeremy Payne in limited action last year. It was inconsistent, not his fault, but it was like week to week sort of how they used him. Nate Palmer, we didn't see until the end of the year. Denman's an unknown commodity as well. And I keep coming back to this, and I hate to be a broken record, but I realize you're trying to use the limited resources you have. And I don't mean limited as in like TCU doesn't have money. I just mean limited as in everybody has a certain amount. And so you've decided we're building this thing around Josh Hoover in the passing game because you've had no problem paying wide receivers. And I get that wide receivers are easier to find in the portal, but Jordan Dwyer, the things that we were hearing about, he was having communication with Washington about big NIL deal. I don't think he suddenly decided, oh, I'm going to take less money. I feel like TCU ponied up and they said, hey, we need a real deal wide receiver because we're losing Jack Besh. We're using Savion Williams. Interestingly enough, even though they have talented young guys in that room, they still said, you know what, we got to go get playmakers that can play right now. But they haven't taken that approach with offensive line and running back. And maybe the issue is just, hey, we have a quarterback who can throw it. We're running an air raid system right now. And we're going to allocate our resources to that. We've brought in offensive linemen who pass block well. We brought in receivers who can make plays. But it's just bizarre to me because for a few years now, we have sort of had this narrative in our mind of, well, it's just they're passing the ball all over the place. They're running this offensive system because they're handcuffed by their personnel. They don't have the personnel they need to run the ball effectively. So what are you going to do? You just throw your hands up and you try your best with what you have. And you get creative in the short passing game, and you get creative with a Wildcat quarterback package, and you make the best you can out of what you got. But we're on year 3 of that explanation. And at a certain point, it's like something's got to give. Either this is your philosophy in the way that you're approaching things, or you're not great at evaluating, or you're just not willing to invest in these two position groups. I don't know. But since Amani Bailey left, you haven't figured out the running back room. Since your first year, you've had a hodgepodge of guys up front. So, like CJ, who's a loyal listener, he frequently tells me, he's like, you're missing the point. He thinks the scheme is bad in the run game, and that's why they're not attracting top offensive line talent and top running backs. But I keep coming back to the question, is the scheme dictated by the personnel, or is the personnel dictating the scheme? Maybe I said that wrong, but I feel like you understand what I mean. Are they rolling out this strategy because they want to do something different, but they can't because of the players that they have? Or are Kendall Browse and Sonny Dykes like, we want to get back to real air raid principles where we're throwing the ball 50 times a game and we're not real worried about how efficient and effective we are in the run game? Everything I've heard in press conferences and from a philosophy standpoint from those two guys would tell me that's not the case, but I'm just sort of at a loss when I look at what they've done to try to improve those areas. And we're getting further and further away from the excuses of, well, the old staff just left us with nothing. I want to continue talking about this. I have more to say. So we'll take a quick break, come back, and I'll talk about how this is a big year. And I think you got to go get, whether it's running back or offensive line, you got to get somebody who can move the needle in the run game. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Few things will make you feel better than when you're able to declutter, organize, refresh your space. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, WayFair has everything you need, and it's all within your budget. There's something for every style and every home. Check out WayFair today. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it here on the screen, but wayfair.com is the best place to get your home the refresh it needs and make it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. Give your home the refresh it needs with WayFair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. WayFair, every style, every home. I keep coming back to this idea of, 2025 is a big year. A lot of pieces are in place. And I realize that they have made strides and committed both monetarily and from a time perspective to get to this place. You've got the majority of your defense coming back. Andy Avalos in year 2. Kendall Browse in year 3. You're not going super heavy in the transfer portal. You're banking on the guys that you have on campus, the culture that you built, carrying over to another season and building on it. And so what I'm talking about now, like adding Dominic Richardson, I don't even think that would be a huge investment. But I do wonder why Sonny hasn't gotten in the, not in the face, but has not gotten FaceTime with the people that are making it happen from a personnel standpoint and said, hey, we've got what we need in place. When we go to spring practice, we're not going to spend a lot of time doing installs. Everybody knows the scheme. It's just going to be like getting young guys and new players up to speed. The thing that has been a glaring need for the past few seasons has been consistency running the ball, winning those early downs, putting our quarterback in better second and third down conversion situations. So let's push towards that. Let's get people that move the needle in that area. And doing that puts a target on your back. It does. Going all in that way will put more pressure and weighted expectation on this football team. We saw Ole Miss go through it this year. Lane Kiffin, all those jokes he was throwing out there, and I say jokes loosely because he was in all seriousness saying, hey, we deserve to be in the playoff. The poor persecuted SEC that never gets the benefit of the doubt. But in my mind, I was watching Lane get up there and talk about how playing in the SEC is different than anywhere else in the country. And it's almost like an entirely different league. And the committee got it wrong. And I'm thinking, this is someone who's trying to shift blame because he knows that he failed. He's got people to answer to. They went and got him the players that he said they needed to get to compete at the highest level, and he couldn't do it. And so all this politicking that he's doing after the fact, yes, it's because he cares about his players. It's because he's a competitor, and he wants to be at the highest level of sport. But it's also because he's trying to explain why it didn't work. And when you go get big-time names and invest in a huge way, it puts the pressure squarely on you to deliver. And I think this coaching staff is already sort of in that situation, given how they ended the season and what people want to see this upcoming year. But I'm having trouble getting my head wrapped around the idea of these guys that have, over the years, yeah, they're air raid people. They come from that Mike Leach tree, but through their different stops, they both acknowledge, like, hey, we've learned the importance of having a run game. We've learned the importance of playing complementary football. We've learned the importance of having a defense that's functional and good, and putting that defense in good situations and not hanging them out to dry by running tempo all the time and going 3 and out and not allowing them to get a break or putting them in bad field position by being super aggressive. There's a balance there that you have to strike. And I think they've done a lot of that. So I don't get why this is such a big bridge for them to cross. And again, if the response is, well, we're trusting the people that we have on the roster, that they're going to get better and improve, and we'll give some of the guys that didn't have a lot of opportunities this year more opportunities next year, and it's going to work out. That's understandable and it's logical, but I remember Sonny on 365 Sports last offseason telling my friends Paul Catalina and David Smoke, being like, hey, he was asked specifically about the running back spot, and he said, well, Cam Cook's fantastic. We think Trey Sanders is healthier than he's ever been. Our young guys are showing some real progress and some promising signs. We're set there. We went in spring practice thinking, yeah, we'd probably need to go make a move, but we left spring practice saying, you know what? Actually, we're fine. They didn't evaluate that correctly. Now, they figured it out. They found a way to sort of work around it. They found a way for the running game to be effective by non-traditional means. But now you're approaching another offseason where it just feels like, okay, you've made the necessary steps with the passing game. You've added those big-time, game-changing type of wide receivers to replace what's leaving. But it doesn't feel like you have that same urgency when it comes to offensive line play, when it comes to running back room. I would even say I think Sonny's made some concessions and some strides in saying, you know what, we have to have a better defense. It just feels like this is one part of the game that's not getting all the attention it deserves. And I don't want that to be the thing that we look back on at the end of the year and we say, oh man, we have another discussion of like, well, if they just had a solid run game, this offense would have been truly great. We've been humming at a high level. Well, then go make it happen. And if it's on player development, then I hope your coaches are ready to do that. And I hope they're ready to get these guys in a place where they can play right away, because you're going to play a really good defensive mind in week 1, maybe one of the best ever, maybe the best ever in Bill Belichick. And he's going to figure out your tendencies, and he will make your offense uncomfortable. because that's what he's always done. Speaking of running backs, the TCU running back found a new home. We'll talk about that next year in Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Rocket Money. You want to save money? Everybody does. It's tough to do it, man. It's tough to budget. It's tough to figure out where everything's going. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today and cancel those unwanted subscriptions. You ever open up your bank account and you're like, wait, I'm still paying for this? Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel and find your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can build your savings. They have a bunch of users who have saved a total over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. That's almost $740 per user. So it's a significant chunk of money that people are finding once they use Rocket Money, and more specifically, once they use all the premium features along with the app. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. Again, that's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. One more time, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Check it out there if you're watching on YouTube. Cam Cook headed to Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State is one of the better group of 5 programs in the country. And I think this makes sense to me. This is sort of a reset. Go somewhere where the competition is a little less fierce. Show that you can be productive. Show that you can be effective. And if he does that, I feel like there will be interest moving forward if he wants to make that jump again, or if he just wants to finish out his career there. But I wish Cam the best of luck. I hate that. I mean, it is what it is. I understand everybody's trying to be honest. Everybody loves TCU. They want TCU to be great. So they're just giving their honest assessment of things. But he was a highly rated recruit. Everybody was super excited about him. He was given the keys to this spot really early in the process, and it just didn't work, and it didn't happen. And so he parts ways with TCU, moves on. I also saw Julian Knox, North Crowley prospect, who was at TCU for 1 year. He's going to move on to UNC, and we'll look to play corner there. Another one of those guys that was just super intriguing. Felt like a project when he signed, but with the athleticism, thought that, hey, this could work if TCU can get him in the strength and conditioning program, get him coached up in the secondary, because he hadn't played a lot of secondary to that point. He was a backup quarterback behind Chris Jimerson at UNC. Chris Jimerson's at North Texas, so imagine that connection made a big difference here. But he's staying local, moving up to Denton, and he'll play there this upcoming season. Yesterday's show, I talked about Dave Aranda and his infatuation with the Gary Patterson coaching tree as he added Paul Gonzalez to his coaching staff. But another thing that I hit on was Deion Sanders and the possibility of him moving on to the Dallas Cowboys. I was listening to the Doomsday podcast today. My friend Matt Mosley, former radio partner, he was talking with Ed Werder. And they didn't talk a ton about Deion because at that time the news hadn't broke. But Jordan Schultz reported this originally, and then Adam Schefter confirmed it. Sanders has at least had discussions with Jerry Jones, and they expect those discussions to continue. If he left Colorado, that would bring a big opportunity for TCU to potentially take over as sort of the team that could maybe be a consistent winner in the conference. Tommy said Colorado accounted for 22% of the Big 12 viewership. If Prime leaves, so does all the TV numbers. Everyone who played Colorado got a bump in TV numbers. I think if he leaves, that's a bad thing for the Big 12 as far as TV revenue is concerned, and we're up for a new TV deal. I don't think he's a great coach, but he's a master marketer, and we kind of need that in the conference without a true blue blood. Yes, I mean, that's a perspective I hadn't really thought of, but he does bring a ton of eyeballs to the Big 12. And I feel like the league was not so secretly hoping that they would be in Arlington this year in the Big 12 championship game, that they would get to market that Deion in Cowboys Stadium, Shadur, Travis Hunter, and that team going for a conference title, going for a spot in the college football playoff. But Arizona State and Iowa State, because of all the tiebreakers, ended up being the teams that were featured there. So it would be a big hit from a marketing standpoint for the Big 12. And I ultimately don't think it's going to happen, because I feel like if Deion's going to make that jump, it would hinge upon like him getting to coach Shadur at the next level. And I don't see the Cowboys doing that. But I know Jerry has a soft spot in his heart for anybody who has been in that building before. and kind of understands what it means to be a Cowboy. And Deion certainly gets that. And he would really lean into the marketing angle that Jerry loves as well, and just the constant relevancy that is brought with that blue star on the helmet. So we'll talk more about that through the end of the week, but more specifically, TCU football and TCU athletics. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube.